ReZero Starting Life in Another World Volume 19. We had Shirius and Betelgeuse in Volume 16, Capella in Volume 17, Regulus in Volume 18, so of course that in Volume 19 we have the Archbishop of... nope, it's just Priscilla once again. I guess the Archbishop of Gluttony was just deemed too ugly for a cover, and both the author and the illustrator were very excited in this one, so it makes sense that we have Priscilla in her battle attire and Liliana, who seems oddly cheery and upbeat with all of this fire in the background. Liliana's addition to this cover could have been smoother. It's not just the pose and the smile, even the lighting is different. It's like the illustrator drew a banger Priscilla cover and then oops, forgot to add Liliana, so he just went to Photoshop and added a generic Liliana image. It looks so awkward. This cover still looks great, mainly because of Priscilla and the color scheme. I just can't get over how weirdly Liliana was placed in here. For that one guy that's a Liliana fan, I'm sorry my man, they did you dirty. Also, it's funny to me that out of all the characters, Liliana gets a cover before Roswell or Julius. I still think that Volume 19's cover was mid and it should have been Julius, but anyway, let's move on. Volume 19 is nuts. This is probably the craziest volume in the entire series up until now, and it's very action-packed. The volume itself consists of mainly 2 fights, and they are both incredible. Reinhard, Emilia, Subaru, and Priscilla have some great action sequences. We have a battle that reads like Dragon Ball at one point, characters flying, characters walking on water, buildings being broken, buildings in flames, Emilia doing JoJo punches, and at one point my man Reinhard just casually went to the moon. I was and still am so hyped because Subaru can now use a whip, meanwhile Reinhardt is just going to the moon and back. This volume is just insane. Maybe you web novel readers are giggling at me right now, as perhaps I haven't seen anything yet. All I can say though is that this volume was the right kind of crazy, very thrilling and super fun to read. I do have to note something though, and I want to make this clear. ReZero has never been above fan service, but both the author and the illustrator are extra horny in this volume for some reason. I don't know if it's something in the water, but they went the extra perverted mile this time. The volume starts out with an artwork that I don't even know if I can show on YouTube. Then out of nowhere we have a steamy Yuri scene between Priscilla and Liliana. At one point, Emilia just grabs a titty while checking for Sylphie's heartbeat. Like, what is going on in this volume? Anyway, freakiness aside, let's dive into Volume 19, starting with the Yuri power couple Priscilla and Liliana. In this volume, we have a few sub-chapters where Liliana acts as a narrator, which is both funny because Liliana is a funny little dork, and also interesting because we see the perspective of a non-fighter, while Priscilla and Shirius are competing to see who's the biggest pyromaniac. As a side note, at one point Liliana says, "The one, the only, the most egotistical of egoists, Lady Priscilla Barielle," which made me think how well Priscilla would fit into Blue Lock. I know it's not an isekai, but the crossover would be amazing. Priscilla really surprised me. She's much stronger than I thought. When she said that she didn't need Al as he is merely a jester, poor Al by the way, she really meant it. She is not only very skilled in battle, but she's also well equipped. She has a necklace which seems to prevent lethal damage up to a certain limit, and it's just hilarious and fitting that Priscilla has an item that seems like a cash shop pay-to-win item. It just fits the character so perfectly. And of course she has the Sunlight Blade. This may be controversial, but to me it's the best sword we have seen in ReZero. Reinhardt's sword may be stronger, but it's moody, it doesn't want to be drawn half the time, and it just blows everything away, while this one is much more convenient and versatile as it only cuts and burns those that Priscilla wants to. And once again, even her weapon fits the character perfectly, as it completely follows her will. Since we previously saw Emilia fight against Shirius, it makes Priscilla's dominance even more impressive, as Emilia is quite strong herself. Granted, I will say Shirius was considerably more motivated when fighting against Emilia than she was against Priscilla, and when we're comparing characters, we should compare their strengths. Putting it in video game terms, Emilia is more of a magic caster who seemed pretty new to the whole sword fighting thing, while Priscilla is more of a warrior. It makes sense that Priscilla is more adept at physical combat, and I have no doubt that Emilia must have 2 or 3 times the amount of mana that Priscilla has, or something ridiculous like that. Still, I found it funny that Priscilla did have vulnerable moments, but she never seemed truly in danger, especially with that necklace of hers. There was never a moment while I was reading this volume where I thought that Priscilla would lose or even be badly injured, which is an interesting contrast with the other fight that's going on, where the characters are struggling a lot, and it makes the author make the interesting choice of switching the narrative tension onto Liliana. As we ReZero readers know too well by now, for a story to be interesting it needs conflict, drama, it needs the hero to go through some sort of challenge. So, in a peculiar turn of events, while Priscilla is the one doing the actual fighting, the way to frame this to get some emotional investment from the reader is to play it from Liliana's perspective. She's just stuck in the middle of all this chaos and she has her own hero's journey by climbing up the burning building, awakening her blessing of telepathy, and finally reuniting with her sort of lover at the end. We even got Liliana's backstory in the middle of all of this. Don't get me wrong, I can't relate to her in any way, nor do I think you're supposed to, but at least it helped me understand the character better and her motivations. As for Priscilla, we see that she is not all-powerful and we finally get some emotional vulnerability out of her when she gets mad at certain name mentions. It's still just tiny glimpses of weakness. It seems that it's still not time in the story to humble Priscilla, which in a way makes Priscilla as a character stand out so much more because, as we know, in ReZero everybody gets humbled. A lot. Now, I will be honest, my only real critique and my main critique of the entire volume as a whole is that I would have preferred if the fights were structured differently. Instead of constantly switching back and forth between both fights, I would have preferred to first read the entire Shirius fight and then the entire Regulus fight. I find Priscilla amusing and I'm somewhat entertained by Liliana, but neither are my favorite characters and I think that goes for a lot of the readers as well. And it's even harder for me to care for them when they are head-to-head with the Regulus fight. It's a very puzzling decision and I don't understand why the book was written this way. I was so invested in the Regulus fight, I was enjoying it so much that every time the chapter ended and it started back with Liliana, I was so disappointed. It's so jarring to go from a fight that I'm enjoying so much with some of my favorite characters in the series and the strongest characters in the series where we finally see Reinhard go all out to all of a sudden here's Liliana again, she left her parents' home and she sings. I think both fights are great individually. Obviously I enjoyed the Regulus fight way more, but I enjoyed both. However, I would have structured this like a pro wrestling event. First you have the banger opening match to warm up the crowd, or the reader in this case, and then you have your banger main event. By constantly switching between the two, I think it detracts from both fights. It cuts the massive hype of the Regulus fight and it blueballs the reader, and it diminishes the Shirius fight, as it's very hard to be impressed by whatever Liliana and Priscilla are doing when we just saw the epic proportions of what's going on the other side. Would you have preferred to read both fights in a row, or do you prefer this back and forth switching like it is in the volume? Leave it in the comments below. Now, speaking of epic proportions, let's get down to the main event. Subaru, Emilia and Reinhard versus the Sin Archbishop of Greed, Regulus Corneas. This fight was a banger, it was so good, it even tempted me to skip ahead of the Liliana chapters because I was just so invested in this. The first thing that must be said is that Regulus and Reinhard was an incredible pairing of characters. No other duo could provide such an over-the-top crazy battle as this was. It truly was the unstoppable force versus the immovable object, and in the middle of all of these broken buildings and cheat powers and even space travels, the thing that surprised me the most is Reinhard's ability to just come back to life. So this guy is essentially the strongest human in the series, and even if you manage to finally get him, he just comes back? I hope the royal selection never devolves into some sort of battle royale, because if it does, it will be pretty easy for the Feldcamp to just get the win. I expected Reinhard to also have some kind of invulnerability blessing. I never expected him to just come back to life. He's like a video game character with all of the cheats unlocked. Because of Regulus' powers also being very unfair, this fight was very entertaining and I really enjoyed how Subaru approached this very strategically by trying out various hypotheses until one that he could finally win with. They try various weak spots in his body, they tried to throw him into water, which was my personal guess by the way, shame it wasn't that easy, and they even tried to hit him with his own moves. I think the only other strategy that they didn't try that I thought of while reading this was getting Regulus away from the city. Usually the cliche in media is that these types of characters with invulnerability powers have some sort of range limit. We never did get to know if Regulus had to be within a certain range of his wives or not, but I guess it really didn't matter in the end. I will say that even in retrospect, the wives were not an easy to guess weak point, and that's because of two reasons. The first is that Regulus at no point shows any care for them or even tries to, get the fight away from the ladies. In fact, he does the exact opposite. He attacks Sylphie in front of Emilia and even threatens them in front of Reinhard and Subaru. The second is that for any other character to bring his wives to a battlefield would be highly suspicious, but for Regulus, it just seems like something his character would do, regardless of his authority or not. Now, this fight could have been just an over-the-top epic fight. What really takes it to the next level is that Regulus is such an incredible villain. He's so easy to hate, and it's so satisfying to finally watch him get beat up. He's so despicable and self-centered and arrogant and an overall bad person. Regulus is a tremendous villain. The only thing I have to say is I don't think that he fits his sin. Regulus represents the sin of greed, and while I can see certain elements of greed in his personality, to me he embodies the sin of pride. He constantly talks down to everyone, he believes himself to be more than he is, and he only wants to win under specific conditions to prove his superiority. Somehow trying hard is beneath him. Regulus could have been literally unbeatable. He could have won here, but he was too arrogant to take Subaru seriously or even try to use his authority to its fullest potential. Every single line of dialogue this guy has is so condescending. How is this guy not pride? I know that the sins of the witch cult are not super rigid. For example, Betelgeuse was ironically incredibly hardworking, but he was the sin of sloth. But Regulus here fits pride so well, it just seems weird to me. One of my favorite moments in the volume that made me laugh out loud is when we were getting into Regulus's backstory and it seemed like he was somehow redeemable, but then nope, he was a scumbag from the very beginning. Some guys are just born evil. As a side note, what's going to happen to his wives now? It would be cool if some of them joined the Emilia camp. Do any of the wives know how to do accounting? Otto is a bit overworked. And once again, I have to praise Subaru. This man managed to come up with various plans to counter Regulus and even managed to hold on against one of the most powerful characters in the series with only his mind, his body, his parkour skills, and his mighty whip. I was reading this volume and I thought to myself, wow, Subaru sure has grown a lot. He's no longer just human bait. And then I realized, wait, he's still just human bait but at a much higher level, which is funny but still pretty impressive. Subaru is truly growing into the role of a master strategist that everyone but himself sees to see him as, and he's much more competent than at the beginning of the series. As competent as Subaru was here though, there's a very dark undertone that I find to be very interesting. Because his opponents are so strong, or perhaps because the situations are so desperate, twice now has Subaru relied upon Betelgeuse's power, Unseen Hands. For just that one time he decided to revert to the old name, Come forth, Unseen Hands. After all that Betelgeuse put him through, here he is using his power, and it seems that there's not only a physical drawback but also some psychological scars that remain after he uses this power. Subaru sneered as he hid his own pain. It was a grin no less evil than Betelgeuse's. And after the fight with Regulus, he absorbs one more witch factor. It was just like how something had slithered into him when Betelgeuse died too. Subaru Natsuki carried that burden alone in silence. This whole development is fascinating to me. Subaru has proven that he is a hero and that he embodies the knightly value of doing what's right, even if it's in his own Subaru-like way. And yet, in order to keep doing what must be done, he keeps relying on the vile powers of his hated enemies, and it seems that there's a very dark price to pay. I love this so much. I look forward to seeing how this all develops, and to me Subaru is one of the best protagonists in fiction, and ReZero is the best isekai by far. If the anime is promotion for the light novels, then the inverse is also true. I couldn't help but think how well this will look animated. I hope they put as much care into season 3 as they did the previous seasons. This volume was the most fun I've had reading ReZero since perhaps volume 9. It was super hype, super entertaining, and very fun to read. And the best part is, Arc 5 isn't even over yet, and we still have a lot of cool storylines to finish, like Garfield, Wilhelm, Al, and so much more. It really paid off to have such a huge cast of characters. Besides doing the fights sequentially instead of in parallel, I have really nothing to criticize in this volume. In fact, if I went into depth on everything that I enjoyed, I'd be here all day. So let's wrap it up with my MVP for volume 19, Reinhard. This man is the definition of overpowered and, by his own words, a monster that hunts other monsters. If it wasn't for him being able to test every possibility, figuring out Regulus would have been very difficult. I love this volume and I hope that Arc 5 finishes off with a bang, as I'm really enjoying it up until now. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye bye.